I'm Aromar Revi. In about a dozen minutes, I'm going to share highlights of a report that IIHS produced for the 15th Finance Commission in 2020, while India was going through its first wave of the COVID pandemic. It was and still is a very difficult time. India has not seen so many deaths and such mass suffering since partition and probably the 1943 Bengal famine. Most parts of our economy have been decimated. Hundreds of millions are estimated to have fallen into poverty. Full livelihood recovery may take many years, and 250 million children have lost more than a year of education. Many of us have struggled, individually, institutionally, and collectively, trying to respond to these catastrophic changes. With some form of respite, we thought it useful to focus on the opportunities of post-COVID recovery. In preparation for the UN's 75th General Assembly in 2020, I was invited to respond in the UN Chronicle to the UN Secretary General's policy brief on COVID-19 in an urban world. My article made 3 points. First, urbanization concentrates economic livelihood and educational opportunities, and the potential for social transformation and gender justice. On the other hand, it also concentrates poverty, economic, social, and spatial inequality and epidemics. COVID-19 has brought these apparently contradictory processes together in India and across the world. Second, cities could lead post-COVID economic and livelihood recovery via the informal sector and MSMEs. Focusing on a green investment stimulus in affordable housing, resilient urban infrastructure will have multiplier impacts that could restart broken supply chains and help bring the economy out of its post-pandemic shock. Third, this is the opportunity to rethink universal access to food security, basic urban services of water, sanitation, and clean energy, and social protection to address many vulnerabilities that were starkly undermined during the lockdowns and the chaos of COVID. In a high-income context, the €1 trillion European Green Deal and the Biden administration's ongoing battle to clear its $1.5 trillion infrastructure plan are based on a similar logic. Post-pandemic economic and job recovery, along with rapid decarbonization, accelerated by investments in urbanization, infrastructure and housing, supported by a massive fiscal stimulus and public investment. The question for India is whether we are ready for such spatially and sectorally coordinated investments and interventions led by the fisc, supported by significant and potentially difficult governance reforms and building of new institutional capacities that draw in private investors, cities, and citizens. This IIHS report to the Finance Commission outlines how this may be done. Let me take you through 7 questions that we tried to answer. We have learned from the last year to enable immediate post-COVID economic recovery by establishing safety nets for food, tenure and housing, decent work, and basic services, enabling economic recovery and resilience while addressing migration and informality. In the short to medium run, we can do this in 4 ways. First, by improving urban living and working conditions and economic opportunities for about 450 million people living in about 8,000 places in 2021. Second, addressing the needs and opportunities of incremental urban population over 2021-31 of about 150 million people in about 12,000 plus places, the basics, housing, basic services, and infrastructure. Third, strengthen economic activity to create opportunities for decent and more productive work, especially across the informal sector. Fourth, strengthening urban and rural linkages, linking urban areas, outgrowths, and adjoining villages. We can build momentum by focusing on 3 strategic priorities. First, by accelerating recovery and growth in locations and sectors that have the most potential. Second, mitigating vulnerabilities in the least developed and most exposed states and districts. Third, addressing bottlenecks in finance, institutional, and implementation capacity. We are glad that the 15th Finance Commission built on our recommendation to match the proportion of grants between rural and urban local bodies with the distribution of India's population. Central and state schemes should converge to enable economic recovery and development across MSMEs in manufacturing, trade and tourism, construction, clean energy, and carbon neutral mobility. Climate and disaster resilient infrastructure across environmental services such as water, sanitation, and solid waste, energy services including solar, gas, and efficiency, e-mobility and logistics, and ICT should also be enabled. Multiple reforms are necessary in land systems and affordable housing. These include a land and property tax system reform, planning for integrated economic development with land use and mobility infrastructure coming together. Housing should be tackled by enabling upgradation and rental housing and producing new affordable construction. Following 30 plus years of India's economic reform, 5 mega urban regions of more than 20 million people each are set to emerge, along with 5 emerging economic corridors in South, Central, and Eastern India. Development opportunities in 5 historically underdeveloped regions, ecologically sensitive and high risk prone zones, also need to be addressed. Like in most effective COVID responses worldwide, interventions in India should be led by central, state, and local governments, followed by crowding in of other resources by doing 5 things. First, leveraging and redirecting existing central schemes and programs. Second, strengthening ULBs and state government capacity to mobilize, implement, and regulate. Third, building state and local enterprise capacity to implement and finance. Fourth, building and retrofitting disaster and climate resilient infrastructure and buildings. Fifth, using spatial development strategies to respond to what exists and what can be built upon. 2 critical conditions are necessary to enable this: transforming urban governance and significantly raising urban investments. India suffers from weak urban governance for multiple reasons, including patchy implementation of the 74th Constitutional Amendment over 25 plus years, because of limited state government interest and a weak or non-existent fiscal base of most ULBs, especially post-GST, in spite of the efforts of multiple finance commissions. There is also little space in the 74th Constitutional Amendment for multi-stakeholder, multi-scalar governance necessary for economic recovery and acceleration and nimble resource mobilization. In addition, there is deep fragmentation between state governments, ULBs, and parastatals responsible for key urban sectors and outcomes that needs to be addressed. So what do we need to do? Operationalize new forms of regional and metropolitan governance, starting with mega-urban regions, megacities, and emerging economic clusters, to plan and manage them better, help finance regional infrastructure, and manage resources and mitigate risk. Clear transition timelines from short-term institutions, for example, SPVs and PPPs, to constitutionally mandated ULBs and innovative new regional governance institutions. We need to build and strengthen ULBs via a dedicated state municipal cadre, starting maybe with 5 states with more than 40% urbanization and preparing other states to do so over the decade. India is in the midst of its 3rd generation of urban development programs and reforms. Convergence between these reforms and post-COVID economic recovery will be necessary to mobilize the enhanced investment that we need. India needs an estimated 1.1% of its annualized 2020 GDP, an investment of about 2.3 lakh crores in about 475 Class 1 cities over this decade to upgrade current urban areas with about 350 million people living in it. Enabling planned extension to cater to about 50 million more people and further upgrade infrastructure and urban services by 2031 to meet the 2011 HPEC norms. China spent almost the same proportion of its GDP in building its high-speed transport infrastructure in the 1990s and 2000s. But there is a serious caveat. We need about 1 lakh crore for land development, which would be difficult to fund centrally. A question is how state governments can finance this. Without this, in spite of our best efforts around resource mobilization, building institutional capacities, and deploying new technologies, it may be difficult to deliver significant results. Resource constraints and limited current fiscal space imply the need to target and phase post-COVID urban recovery over the decade in 3 steps. Phase 1A, starting with the 100 largest cities to enable a balance across states, building on existing central and state schemes, utilizing available institutional capacities, incentivizing livelihood-enhancing and green investments, and attempting to crowd in private investment at an appropriate time. Phase 1B, simultaneously investing in critical regional connectivity and disaster and climate-resilient infrastructure, prioritized by mega-urban region, emerging urban clusters, and underdeveloped regions to maintain regional balance, led by public investment from the COVID recovery package, and creating appropriate conditions for PPP and private investment. Expanding to all Class 1 towns via a new Amrit 2.0 and SBM 2.0 after a strong push for state-level urban and land system reforms to promote security of tenure and affordable housing, improve regional and interstate connectivity, and building institutional capacity through a state-level municipal cadre. Strengthening ULBs via fiscal federalism by expanding their fiscal base, governance mandates, and capacity to address all urban areas and an incremental 150 million people through regionally defined processes of expansion, nucleation, decongestion, and densification. India has a unique opportunity to use its urbanization to accelerate post-COVID economic recovery. The challenge for us as a low-middle income economy would be to leapfrog using this strategy while addressing poverty reduction, inequality, social transformation, and balanced regional economic development.